think the word is assertive.
Okay.
Influential.
We're live, and they're talking about whether Andrew Yang is assertive or influential.
Yeah.
I think he's certainly, you know, drawing a lot of attention to himself. Yeah. So, yeah. Does anyone have anything they want to start with? Any kind of burning questions? Oh, out of curiosity, has anyone read his book, The War on Normal People? No, me neither. Yeah. Okay.
Who wrote that?
Andrew Yang, the guy we're talking about.
I checked it on the Amazon.
Okay.
I checked it on the Amazon.
The live stream is working. The live stream is working, so that's great. Yeah. So we have a few things to talk about here. So let's talk about his definition of basic income. So before we started the live stream, we went over our definition of basic income, or kind of the one we're working with here. His definition is a universal basic income is a form of social security that guarantees a certain amount of money to every citizen within a given governed population without having to pass a test or fulfill a work requirement. Every universal basic income plan can be different in terms of amount or design. So that's pretty general. Does anyone have any objections to that or any thoughts?
I don't know how you can object to it.
Oh, I can object to anything.
It's a definition.
Yeah. I don't know that I like the idea of framing basic income as social security. I tend to think of it more as serving a necessary function in the economy. Maintaining a flow of money to consumers so that the economy can operate properly. The economy isn't going to produce things that people aren't going to buy, and this is kind of like an economic. I would say it's an economic stability mechanism. People don't need to borrow as much, and the economy can stabilize if you have a basic income.
It's a part of our natural inheritance from.
It's not really related to borrowing, because if people are poor, they can't really borrow. This gives them money. This gives money to people without any necessity for them to go and try to borrow. It's really not relevant to the idea. Right? I mean, you want to put money in the hands of people who don't have much demand because they haven't got much money. You're saying, yeah, I'll let you get some demand here, which will stimulate the economy. Right?
Sure.
I mean, there's still room in a basic income business for borrowing.
Of course, no. Nothing stops people from lending, but the fact is banks don't readily lend to poor people for obvious reasons. And they don't think they're going to get paid back. So, sure.
Or they do so in a predatory way.
Yeah, or because they figure they got to compensate for their risk.
All right, we're going to do the hand raising.
There's a microfinancing program in India. They give out like $20 or whatever to, and they get paid back like 98% of the time or something like that. They use the money to create businesses and things.
Yeah, I think I know what you're talking about.
Okay, so I think Charlie's right, certainly that there will always be borrowing. Sometimes borrowing can be very effective. But if there's too much borrowing in the economy, and that causes like instability in the private financial sector and stuff like that, if you have a high enough basic income, then that means people don't have to borrow as much in order to spend. So I think, there is kind of the banker's paradox where you're not going to lend to someone who actually needs the money.
Exactly. That's exactly.
Right. But there's also the issue of, a lot of times people who are able to borrow and who are borrowing would be better off if they had the money straight up instead of borrowing. And the stability of the financial sector would be better off if there wasn't, so much debt kind of continuously accumulating. So I think that's an important part of basic income. And if we think about it just as a social security, then we kind of limit, what it can be. Go ahead, Dave.
So do basic income plans now try to replace like unemployment stipend, or like is it an add-on to it?
Yeah, so it's both. Some of the plans, are like it's going to replace this and this and that. I think for Andrew Yang's plan in particular, he wants to say that if you choose to accept the basic income, and his plan is $1,000 a month, if you choose to accept the basic income, then you're foregoing other social benefit programs. So for him, it's a choice. So you can either stay on the existing system or you can switch over to a basic income. So
then those who are unemployed will just, if the unemployment stipend is higher, then we'll just keep on that. And then those who weren't unemployed will just get extra money. That seems like it's like high strong.
So everybody received like the $1,000 a month?
So his plan is every citizen between the ages of 18 and 64 would receive $1,000 a month unless they opt out of it and choose to receive existing benefits.
Well, so like doesn't matter how much money I'm making like that. I can choose to receive $1,000.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Charlie.
Does he say where the money comes from?
Yeah. So he is proposing. You're not going to like this. He is proposing a VAT tax of 10%. I think.
Yeah.
10%.
Yeah.
That's how he wants to raise the money. That tax.
Yeah. So are you guys familiar with what that is?
So for imports,
Consumption. It's a consumption tax.
It's a consumption tax. It's like a VAT, value added tax, and it's like a sales tax, except instead of just the final sales, you tax at every step of the production process when you add value. Yeah, go ahead, dude.
Then, like, your incentive for having this is to try to stimulate spending, right? And if your consumption tax is higher, then doesn't that offset it?
balances, I guess.
Then why?
Yeah. This is where we get into a discussion that starts to go crazy. You can always hypothesize that if you do this, this is going to happen. The economy is tremendously complex. We don't really know what's going to happen as a result of anything. But one thing you can say for sure, with a consumption tax, for example, is that wealthy people do not consume in proportion to poor people. Warren Buffett doesn't eat 50,000 hamburgers. Where do you eat one? Even though he's 50,000 times wealthier than you. So what you're doing with the consumption tax is disproportionately hurting poor people. You're taxing the people who are poor out of proportion to the wealthy people.
Right.
That's why I think it's a bad idea. I understand the reason.
Wait, so you don't think funding for that kind
Yeah,
of
I don't think that's the way to fund it. I think it's very regressive with respect to wealth.
In the campaign, I didn't see any detailed information about. It says 10% they will act as a tax, but it doesn't say anything about if it will be extra tax. I mean, for Massachusetts, for example, it's 6.25. We will add 10% more to this.
Also,
Yeah.
does it become 10% or after?
I think this is a new tax on top of the existing
New
tax.
tax.
Yeah.
It's new money to be raised.
Yeah.
And it says they will add this tax all for goods and services.
Yeah, and for the
There is
intermediate
no
production
detailed
steps.
information about this, just it says like that.
Well, so there are VAT taxes in some places, like in Europe. Yeah.
For example.
And
Average 20% in Europe,
what's that?
VAT taxes. Average 20% in Europe.
Yeah.
Um,
So that's higher than what Andrew Yang is proposing. Go ahead.
And conservatives tend to like these consumption taxes. They don't say it, but for the reason I said, is that they say it's because it encourages investment and dampens consumption. As you pointed out, if you're poor and now there's a tax, it's harder for me to buy something. But that's what they say, but what they really are hiding is that wealthy people get off very, very nicely. And so conservatives being generally wealthy. So this is a great idea.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you're specifically using it to fund something that's designed to help poor people, it's a little harder to say.
Yeah.
But yeah, I would say to Daniel's original question, I'm not convinced that the cost of the tax wouldn't outweigh the benefit that you get from the basic income in terms of the effect on the economy. And I'd have to I think this is a really complicated question. And I
think they should make it more detailed because as you know, in USA there is no any tax for food,
Right.
but it should be for some foods, for luxury foods and
Sure.
unhealthy foods. They fight with the food industry lobbies to so they should make it detailed. I know it's very superficial.
That's another reason.
Martin, go ahead.
So I lived in Germany for a number of years, and they have a value-added tax there, and all these things, the implications of them can get pretty complicated. One of the things that I always understood was a effect of a value-added tax is when a German manufacturer manufactures something for the home market, the home consumer, the German consumer pays a value-added tax. When Germany exports that product to a country like the United States, nobody in the United States pays that value-added tax. When an American company ships goods to Germany, however, American companies price into the price of their goods their corporate taxes. So there's a little bit of, I'm not going to call it scheming, but this has this sort of international trade impact where, at least I think in some countries, they use a value-added tax because they think it gives them competitive advantage in international markets because their home goods they can export at a lower price while their imports are necessarily priced higher in countries that, like in the United States, the way some corporate taxes work.
I think 16% is too much.
Go ahead.
16% it will be for offers.
But I don't think value-added tax added to the sales tax. Like you can't just do sales tax of 6% and we're not going to add 10%. I don't think so.
You
right?
could. I mean, it's possible. Charlie, go ahead.
I would just, with all due respect to the people who are participating, I would suggest that we not discuss the intricacies or economic consequences of different variations of it, but rather focus on the main idea, which is basic income, why do we want it, and how do you pay for it?
Well, yeah, let's focus on Andrew Yang. So here's a question. How do we feel about the restriction to U.S. citizens? Does that make sense?
I mean, as opposed to anybody who's in the United States? Or?
Anybody who's in the United States, or should we give basic income to everyone in the world? I don't know.
And I'm really going to ask how you get the money for
Yeah.
pay everyone in the world.
I thought you didn't want to talk about economic stuff.
No, I didn't say that. I said,
Oh, you did?
I want to
Yeah,
talk
okay.
about intricacies of the economics.
Right.
You know, how do you pay for it is, as I said last time, there are two questions. Should you have a basic income? And how do you pay for it? They're two separate questions.
I don't agree that they're two separate questions. I think the amount of the basic income is precisely determined by what the economy can afford. So if the economy can afford zero basic income, then you have a basic income of zero.
But in order to know how much the economy can afford, you're going to have to give me a model of the economy and tell me exactly which variables can produce affording and not affording. I mean,
I don't think there's any model that's going to give you the answer. I think you just need to try it. And
well, that's the problem.
Yeah.
If you get up and say, I'm going to give everybody a basic income,
right.
A lot of people, conservatives particularly, are going to say, we can't afford it.
Right.
And then you're going to say, well, we can afford it. And
I
then
think a good conceptual starting point is like, do you think there's enough like food in the world to feed everyone that nobody should go hungry? Like, can you imagine a world where if we allocated resources like fairly, we could feed everyone?
yes, but that doesn't convince a conservative. The conservative says there's enough food in the world, but it's too bad if you don't have the money to buy it. You're not going to convince them that
I mean,
way.
but what is not
well, let's.
like if there's enough food to feed everyone,
Yeah, but
then why isn't there enough money for everyone to get fed?
because some people are losers. That's what a conservative says. That's the whole.
So
Well, I mean,
can I just say I would appreciate not like characterizing, kind of
Straw man.
political like parties as like kind of these other guys who are just like well they like and I think we don't need to worry like in this conversation here we don't need to worry about convincing the world that this is going to work. I want to like convince each other and see like what we think is going to work. And I think that's far more useful because I mean, like, if we all agreed on everything and everything was obvious to us, then maybe we'd be, you know, talking about like, okay, now how do we get the world to see things the way we see it? But we don't. Like, there's plenty of people in here with all kinds of differing views. So I don't know. That's just a guiding principle kind of thought. Yeah, there.
I have a question. So, basic income is you give the same amount to everybody, right? Like the
Yeah.
same amount, not percentage. Then why do we tax wealthy people more? Isn't that fair? So what makes basic income special that we can say that okay, we'll give the same amount to everybody, but then like regardless of what you make, but income taxes.
Go ahead, Richard.
There's an argument that the wealthy benefit more from the economy. Like, they use the roads and the airports and whatnot more. And, like, who's going to fly all over the world all the time? A wealthy person's more likely to do that. Like, I'm going to use my private jet and fly from Atlanta to San Diego
Then
5 times a week or
What
something.
about poor people use welfare more?
It doesn't work.
But there's also an argument that the wealthy need a educated populace to perform the services for them. So if they have a poorly educated populace, they're not going to be able to do as much.
Okay.
And also,
So I want to go to Charlie since you weren't raising your hand.
Let's see if we can clarify. You're correct. If you give the same amount of money to each person, you're giving proportionally more wealth to poor people than you are to wealthy people. That's called redistribution of the wealth. That's what basic income is. Even though they talk about income, it's really redistributing the wealth, which is, in my mind, a good idea for practical reasons. And I think Alex mentioned it last time, and I mentioned it, which is that if there's too much inequality, there are too many people with no wealth, those people are stuck and your economy gets stuck. By putting some money back into these lower depths of the economy, you can start to get the economy going better. I think that's a good argument. It's also something, okay, morally, I may like it, but I realize when I talk to somebody who isn't liberal, they're not going to agree that it's morally a good idea to give money to poor people. Like I said, they say, look, if you didn't make it, too bad. You're poor, you're poor. You know, get over it. You're going to have to live that way.
Yeah.
You can't convince them by saying it's a good idea to give money to poor people.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, which is that what's fair and what's not is different to different people, and what's moral and what's not is different to different people too. To your question about, you know, basic income kind of being distributed evenly, whereas, you know, taxes are uneven, you know, we tax the rich people more. It kind of brings up the issue of you can think about the spending, the government spending, and then you can think about the taxation. And as long as you're spending a certain amount and taxing a certain amount, you can decide whether the distribution is uneven on the spending side or have it be uneven on the taxing side, and you can get the same numbers in the end. So you could have, you know, a completely flat tax, but then you'd have a really skewed distribution of the spending, or you could have a completely skewed tax and flat spending, where you tax the rich people more, and you can have the numbers add up the same, depending on whether you do the discrimination on the taxing side or the spending side. Go ahead.
Just a point of clarification again. We don't tax wealthy people more than we tax poor people. We tax wealthy incomes more, but very wealthy people have very low incomes relative to their wealth. So, in fact, the tax system is biased to favor wealth. We don't tax wealthy people as much as we tax poor people. That's part of the problem. And right now, totally legal, standard, so-called progressive tax system lets wealthy people accumulate wealth tax-free and penalizes people who work for a living. That's a fundamental problem.
It's described as the redistribution of that, we cannot convince rich people we should say that I believe.
Well, no,
Because they will say, I don't want to share with my wealth, so
I told you, if you go
we
through
should change
the plan that I outlined last time, where you tax everybody equally, same percentage, right? So you're not discriminating, you're not punishing anyone. Wealthy people get all the blood drains out of their face. They go bananas when you say that. Because right now they're not paying anything. So of course you're not going to convince them that this is a good plan. But it's a fair plan. That's at least the first argument.
which value added taxes, everybody will be paying for it. Everybody.
Well, 50% of the population has no wealth, so they will pay no taxes. Because any percentage of zero is zero.
Okay, so let's focus more on Yang's plan and and maybe stuff related to more directly related to that. So Madeline and Ron, who are two of our regulars here, are actually on the live stream right now. And yeah, so hi guys. So Madeline says the VAT in Holland is 6% for basic needs and 21% for everything else. Sometimes 0% for exports. So it's not that regressive. And then she says, Yang is right that if the US instated a 10% VAT and kept the sales tax, which would generate massive revenue, Americans would still be paying less consumption tax than Europeans. So, I mean, we've seen that it can be done, that this kind of taxation can be done.
It's still very regressive.
It might be, we don't know whether it's good or bad necessarily, or we might be sure that it's bad if we're Charlie. But we know that it can be done, and these countries exist. They haven't collapsed, kind of thing. Yeah.
Just a quick question, and this is, I think, fairly essential to my understanding of it. Is the intent, I don't know if this is whether Yang or other folks, is the intent to also extend this to inmates, or was the plan to incorporate those people in the system?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I don't think Yang mentions it specifically, but he does say every citizen. So I would presume that that would mean inmates who are citizens would get it.
Right, and that's, it's all of those.
And what's your name?
Oh, Tony, yeah.
So,
What's your problem?
Oh, there's no problem. It's just I'm trying to figure out what Yang doesn't mention specifically his plan in Ecuador. Do you know his plan, or
No, I mean, why is it a problem to give money to inmates?
That's not a problem. I'm just trying to understand whether he thought things through enough to consider the legal ramifications of that. Different. I mean, you brought up different conservative opinions and perception to this kind of idea. What would their perception to those minutia? What some might think are minutia that actually become fairly important when thinking about the legality of the legal place of inmates in our American system. I mean, they can vote.
yeah.
Something to chew over. And it's actually prompted by your question about, is this extend to? Who does this extend to?
Right. Richard.
Well, it could be said that the amount to incarcerate them, to put them in jail, like feed them and house them or whatever, could be paid for, or at least partially with the basic income, so they wouldn't receive any. Or if they're in the prison for 30 years or whatever, they would have $360,000 or something waiting for them.
Or they could use their basic income to buy the prison food while they're in prison.
Yeah, I didn't mean to derail this into sonic experiments, but it's actually, I mean, it's surprising that Yang actually doesn't make mention of that in this plan.
Yeah, my guess is that he's thought about it. But I also know he's running for president, so he's probably. I mean, I'm not saying he's not going to mention controversial things because he's obviously, got basic income as his main thing on his platform. But he might be avoiding controversial things that he feels are unnecessary. My guess is that it would extend to inmates, and just as he says, every citizen. Yeah. Go ahead, Dan.
So what about the other side? So I said, why not give those who get taxed more basic income? Then what about since those people are already rich enough, why not just don't give them basic income and then give them food?
It's okay.
That's okay.
Yeah, I mean, then it's technically, it doesn't fit the definition of basic income anymore. It gets closer to, what's that?
Welfare.
It gets closer to existing welfare and social programs,
Right,
that
so-
kind of like determine who deserves
Well,
what.
if you want to propose a basic income plan, then you have to defend why that is also necessary for the rich, right? Then
Yeah.
otherwise, just raise welfare.
Yeah, go ahead, Charlie.
It's not necessary for the rich, and it's certainly easy enough to make a program where you say only those people with very, very little wealth or no wealth would get income, and everybody who has some wealth, you don't get income, or you get much diminished income.
Yeah.
It's really, to me, in my mind, that's irrelevant to the problem. It doesn't,
Oh.
it's not a big deal either way.
well,
because
it's-
wealthy people don't care about the
It's
money.
not irrelevant to the
That's-
question if we're
that's
talking about a
what's-
basic income where part of the definition is that you give it.
No, but I mean, you could easily change the definition and say, okay, my new definition is don't give money to the wealthy people. Wealthy people couldn't care less.
Well, this is
The issue they care about is whether you're gonna do this at all. Never mind whether you're gonna give them $12,000 a year.
well, Charlie,
They don't need the 12,000.
Charlie, this is a basic income discussion group, and I think it's reasonable for him to be.
No, I understand that, but I'm saying it's not a problem whether you give it to everybody or you give it all to poor people.
Sure. Jonathan, go ahead.
So one Scandinavian experiment, which had to do with unemployment, I think is a really good example for an argument why you should give it to everyone, which is that basically the people on unemployment, they got the basic income whether they had a job or not, which is different than the way unemployment's work. And so you're not disincentivizing people to change their status. Whereas if you only give it to wealthy people, if you only give it to poor people, then you have some arbitrary cutoff there, and wherever that cutoff is, you're going to disincentivize people from pushing themselves over the boundary.
Go ahead, Lisa.
I would also say that it's worth considering the additional bureaucracy with monitoring people's levels of wealth and deciding where to draw the line, who gets a basic income, who doesn't, whatever. I would say that the current status of wealth inequality is so severe that if we're gonna give an allowance to all the poor people, we might as well just give it to everyone. It's it's not gonna make that much of a
Wait,
difference.
there's too much emphasis on this cutoff point. Well, what if there's no cutoff point? What if it's a distribution, right? Why does it have to be discrete?
So
then it goes down to 1 and then 0.
But
Well,
then you
there's
have
a
to-
cutoff at 0.
Then you're gonna have to submit your income every year to some department that will be reviewing it, and it'll be thousands of employees reviewing their income and everyone's income, and rather than just give $1,000 to everyone. Yeah.
Well, it can hypothetically be automated, and then it would be very easy to. Yeah.
But if you do that, then there's going to be no change because everybody's going to get proportional to everything.
Yeah, so I'm asking, why should there be change then?
Right.
If the main purpose is to benefit the poor more, then what's wrong with just raising welfare, right? What's special about basic income to everybody that it needs to be a new thing?
Yeah. So I think one answer to this question is just the logistic simplicity. So if you give everyone the same amount of money, but then on the taxing side of things, then you tax the wealthy people more. If you set up something like that, it would still be a basic income, but now you're what they call it clawing back the money on the taxation side. So in terms of the amount of money that's going to rich people, they're actually paying more into the system than the poor people are. So you'd still get the same result, but then the government spending side of things is just really simple and really easy.
What do you mean tax wealthy more? So that
I think you could give the rich people less money, or you could just give them the money and then take it back, right? Which would be on the taxation side. What's that? It's equivalent to not giving the money, but in terms of the mechanism of how it works, it's simpler if the government spending is just, this is just an argument for why a basic income might be a good idea, because it just simplifies things, and then you do all the complicated stuff on the taxation side. Richard, go ahead.
Why we create a whole different program of basic income rather than increasing the amount of welfare in the current system is because, if you're using food stamps, SNAP, there's all these cutoffs. So you can't buy a lobster or you can't buy certain things. So, and you also have to monitor how they're spending all the money. And there's also people don't some people won't know what all that they're due. So, but if you're given a basic income, everyone gets that amount. But some people want to know, I don't know that I could get this program, and that would increase my income by $500 a month, or things like that.
Yeah, it seems to be restoring an agency and decision making back. Interesting enough, is almost as a counter to the notion of less government overreach that supplies the capital, the resources for someone to be purchased.
Sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, the government is providing folks. Granting them more autonomy via living on welfare. That doesn't. I don't know what strings might be attached to it. But just the notion is a lump sum check, something like that.
Yeah, or just a direct deposit that keeps going into your account. Go ahead, Lisa.
You could also argue two responses. Going along with that point is like you could argue that giving someone cash is better for the economy than giving them vouchers for various different programs because like it makes
Wait, is that what one is?
well, I mean like
Depends.
with food stamps you can't buy a lobster. So like that's sort of creating an inconsistency in the market. And then the other response that on a different note, the difference between basic income and welfare, you can look at it on a more philosophical level, like we're providing people with actually just what they deserve with their inheritance and not with these patches to cover like various things, that are, their poverty that they cause themselves by being poor, so.
I actually saw earlier this month there are people in some communities they've actually buy $200, whatever their amount is, $200 worth of soda, and then they sell it for half price so they can actually get money. So it's like food stamp dollar is worth 50 cents or something like that. So they're actually not as well off.
Yeah, I was on food stamps for a while, and I definitely got a lot more money than I would have wanted to spend on food. And I wished that I could, put it towards rent or something like that. Would have been fantastic. Yeah. Go ahead, Mark.
So, just in the direction that so I read a description of Andrew Yang's book, and what I think his platform is, and he's very much making the fourth industrial revolution case.
Right.
He's not really talking about basic income as like the current basic income proposals. So if we want to shift the conversation at all, kind of more along the Andrew Yang thing, that would be interesting to me.
Wait, what?
Yeah.
What is that case?
So
again, the fourth industrial revolution case makes the case that there will be a tsunami of job losses as automation, robotics, and what we typically think of as the fourth industrial revolutionary wave makes itself felt across the economy.
You saw the debate that Alex had us look at. What is it called? Intelligence Squared.
Yeah, the intelligence squared.
The argument against that was not going to happen. Now you have to prove that it's going to happen. And now you're in a big ball of wax about it. Is your model accurate? After all, we had the Industrial Revolution. People were thrown out of work. They went to work in sweatshops, and we had a booming economy. Ultimately. So you've got arguments on both sides. You're not going to convince the people who don't believe that.
Go ahead, Elisa.
I would say even if you think that, with AI there will be a whole new class of awesome jobs, even if you think that in the meantime, in between when all the drivers get fired and there's like a mass of impoverished truck drivers and people kicked out of the factories where they still close because suddenly machines can manipulate like three-dimensional fabric. This is going to be maybe a blink of an eye in terms of the century's progress of advancement or whatever. But 10 years of being unemployed due to your factory closing is a lot, and if your lifespan is going to be pretty rough.
Wait.
I have to point out though that you are.
Elisa, choose between Charlie and Martin and Daniel.
You are making an assumption.
Daniel.
I have a quick question. So
Yes.
why is basic income related to the fourth industrial revolution?
I would contend basic income as it is talked about today is not related to the fourth industrial revolution. But what Yang, and to whoever decided to bring him into the discussion, because I think he uses the same term, from what I'm reading in the description of his book is clearly about this sort of notion of a fourth industrial revolution and what it's going to do. And that's a different case, because that becomes, you can make this sort of the natural resource, the extractive industry resources case, like in Alaska, where they have essentially a basic income type, because there's this notion of, there's this resource, we're going to think of it as a statewide resource. Russia does the same thing. I think Saudi Arabia does the same thing. Norway does a similar thing. It's like there's this resource. And so in a fully automated economy, you can begin to think of that capital as a resource, almost like a natural resource. It doesn't, it produces something of value, but not via labor. There's some labor involved. I'm not trying to say it, but what I'm saying is that the notion of, a car factory is all these people building cars. No, it's machines building cars and machines extracting ore and machines turning and intelligence turning ore into steel, and then steel, you know what I mean? It's like, there's just no people involved in this any more than there are people involved in creating oil under the ground. There's some people extracting it and all that, but otherwise it begins to look like a natural resource, all forms of production.
I still don't get why he would he would include it.
So I'm going to interrupt you because Tony was raising his hand.
Yeah, actually, and you brought this up at episode 12. What was the third industrial revolution?
What was the third?
Yeah, the third. I know there were two.
The second?
The first one is like kneading.
Yeah,
The wheel.
Yeah, steam machine.
steam machine production.
No, I think that's the second one. Probably. The first one is just
No,
like
that's the first one.
That's not.
Just
There's a way to solve this
go ahead,
issue
Charlie.
without having a lot of discussion about whether we will have people displaced or won't have people displaced. Because you're assuming also that people are going to be displaced for some amount of time. There's a way to solve it. If you're in favor of basic income, and you don't know whether it's a good idea because people are going to lose their jobs and this is going to save people, just say my platform is, if unemployment goes above X, we will put basic income. So you don't have to say what's going to happen. You just say, if it happens, you of course will agree to basic income because you just said.
So I'm going to say
You don't have to have a discussion.
that plan is not going to work at all. Richard, do you want to explain why?
Well, they can always fool around with the statistics. Like right now, I've seen statistics that there's 16% unemployment because they don't count people who are not looking for jobs. So if they can just say, ask a question where they can skew it so that it can sound like someone's not looking for a job, and then they don't have to count them.
Sure, but you could use different numbers. You could look at the labor force participation rate or something like that. But I have a different answer to Charlie. But do you want to go first, Martin?
So is everybody familiar with the lily pond problem?
Nope.
So the lily pond problem, and it's really a little bit to your point, and it's why I would be uncomfortable with Charlie's point, is a lily on a pond, the next day it doubles, 2 lilies on the pond. The next day it doubles for, whatever. And so the question is, how many days, 30 days to be fully covered, how many days does it take to cover half of the pond with lilies? 29. Okay, so this can be a lily pond problem, which is it doesn't look like a big deal until day 29. Okay, and then on day 30 you're done.
Not done.
You're history.
You're not history. You have unemployment and you institute a basic income.
So
It's too late to plan.
So I'm going to go ahead and disagree with both Charlie and Martin. I would say that you can't look at the unemployment, or even if the numbers aren't fudged, you can't look at the number of people not working and then say, oh, there's enough people not working, now we're going to have a basic income. because historically what we've done is we've enacted economic policy to keep people employed even when we didn't need them employed, just as an excuse to give them money. And even if you have the lily pond problem that Martin's talking about, say the pond is half full and then it fills up with lilies, basically you've gone from half bullshit jobs to 100% bullshit jobs, and you still haven't triggered this point where you've reached enough unemployment to trigger a basic income. So that's my, go ahead.
Again, my point is you can't wait to plan.
Right.
My whole thing with the lily pond is not bullshit jobs or whatever.
Right.
You can't conceptually say, you know what, this doesn't look that bad. We don't really need to plan.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Daniel.
Wait, I don't get your first point. So, if Charlie's plan gets implemented,
yeah,
why would there still be bullshit jobs? Like it would just some people in the government will just disagree with the plan and create those jobs.
Well, they don't know. A lot of times, they don't know that they're creating bullshit jobs. So if you look at Donald Trump saying, "Hey, we don't want to import cheap steel from China because we want to protect American jobs," like we could have bought the cheap steel from China. We didn't need those jobs in America. We shouldn't be producing our own steel. But he doesn't think of it as there being bullshit jobs, right? And it's the same thing with like bailing out the auto, companies after the financial crisis. Like we could have bought our cars from Japan, but we wanted to create and protect American jobs. And those are like the obvious ones, but there's also, more subtle stuff. And like the Federal Reserve itself has a mandate to maintain full employment. So if jobs start disappearing, they'll adjust interest rates to create investments that create new jobs. And do those jobs really need to exist? And maybe for each one of them, you can have an argument for why it's an important job, but maybe there's whole businesses that, we didn't really need in this economy that have been stimulated into existence by monetary policy.
The bullshit, it's a similar thesis that was proposed in the New York article.
Yeah. Or I don't know, it's probably David Graeber.
Well, yeah,
yeah.
What is it? David Graeber. He's London School of Economics. I think he is American, but the whole premise is that a lot of our economy is bullshit jobs, which extends to.
What's the point, though? I mean, there are jobs and there are jobs that are good, there are jobs that are bad. Some people think they're bad, some people think they're good.
Well, when you have them dispassionately, you spell.
I think Melissa's point is that there is like this ideal perfect system where there's an efficient amount of jobs that need to exist, and then all the other jobs are unnecessary. And people traditionally we've created or perhaps overpaid unnecessary jobs just so that we can distribute wealth better. But that's not an efficient system in terms of actual global productivity.
Yeah, think of it as a robotic economy where the robots are producing bullshit, PowerPoints, all of that. So rampant inefficiency that belongs to a large part of the economy. We're paying people to do useless things.
Did he give?
Are you looking at me? You're looking at me?
Yeah, you think that.
No. People are paying me. Is my job a bullshit job?
No.
Well, yeah. What was the bullshit job?
What's your job, Charlie?
Like a toll collection.
Jesus.
I don't want to tell you because you tell me it's a bullshit job.
I think
this is crazy.
I think any individual job, for most jobs, you can't look at that job and say, "Oh, this is a bullshit job. This isn't a bullshit job." Right? But you can look at the economy in aggregate and say, do we need this many car manufacturers? Do we need,
But that's again a very, very difficult question to answer scientifically.
Well, you can't
really know how the economy works. So to say that this sector is redundant is a very difficult problem.
Right. So you're not going to do that. Instead, you just give people the basic income, and then you see which jobs get eliminated.
I agree. That's what I'm saying.
Right. So basic income is what unlocks the potential for robots to eliminate the jobs that should have already been eliminated.
That's what I'm saying. But instead of trying to figure out whether in fact robots are going to eliminate jobs, forget about that. Just give them the basic income.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that because you can't solve it.
Richard, did you have something?
On my Facebook page, I actually posted today about David Graeber's book. It's an article from the American Prospect. It's called "Take This BS Job and Pretend to Love It." That's what the article's called. Let's see. Oh, here's a picture here. It's the Seinfeld character George Costanza, who after years of temp jobs and unemployment lands a cushy job in the New York Yankees back office. Well paid and delightful proximity to the heroes of his youth. He nonetheless suffers anxiety from the problem that he doesn't understand what his job is supposed to be, and nobody at work seems to be sweating about assignments or deadlines. His stroke of brilliance is to furrow his brow and squint his eyes in a way that makes him look busy to his colleagues.
Seinfeld is a good show. You guys haven't seen it.
It's funny in a sitcom, but borderline tragic in real life. Why a BS job would be regarded as daily torture instead of a paid vacation might be confounding to anyone who hasn't spent a lion's share of their waking hours pushing a boulder of Outlook calendar invites up a mountain of pointless conference job calls on mute.
Yeah, so I think there are plenty of jobs that do feel that way to people, and I think there are plenty of jobs that don't feel that way, that feel like really meaningful jobs that, in terms of the grand scheme of the economy, still might not be necessary, and that might include, jobs at the IRS figuring out, who deserves to be taxed and all of that.
Yeah, another
Go ahead,
point. If you're going to be submitting proof that you deserve income, what happens if you don't submit? Right? It makes you, you get an obligation of submitting proof that you deserve $1,000. But there are people who decline and refuse to get driver's license because of religion or just they don't want to live in the forest and they don't want to get driver's license. So that's and there are laws to allow these people to vote. Like in New Hampshire, I think if you go to vote and you don't have a driver's license, you sign the affidavit. If you lie that it's you, you go to prison. So there's a law to support people who refuse to get driver's license. We shouldn't push them to make them submit proof that they deserve the income. That's
and I think that's a great point. And there's also the issue of if you have to jump through kind of bureaucratic hoops to get your benefits, then the people who have the most resources to figure all that out, to figure out the system, or they have the time to go in and negotiate and all that. People who have those resources aren't the ones who need the benefits the most.
Exactly.
Yeah. So if you have something, even if it's not a basic income, if you have something that kind of goes to everyone by default, and then it's the responsibility of the person to say, I actually don't need this and give it back. That's probably a lot better to have it be opt out instead of opt in. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a question on why you chose Dave Yang. His proposal is most realistic to the Yang method of basic income, or
nope.
It's further along, or are there others that have been?
Yeah. 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 So Charlie had a proposal that he gave last time, and I think some of the other people in this room have ideas of how to do it. I chose Andrew Yang because he's prominent right now. He's running for president, and I wanted to talk about something related to what's currently happening. So, I mean, right now in the United States, the greatest chance of having, a government-run basic income is through Andrew Yang. There have been plenty of proposals out there, like when we watched the debate. So Andy Stern and Charles Murray both have plans that are different from Andrew Yang's plan. Yeah. Oh, in terms of politician, he's the only big politician that's doing it. There are some legislators in Hawaii, I think, who are talking about it, and some more local politicians that are pro basic income.
There's some countries that are trying
And there are countries that, so there's whole like outside of the United States. There's in Italy. Italy recently had elections where they have a government that's now two parties that are very different, but they kind of agree on more government spending, more benefits for the people, and one of the parties that I think has basic income on their platform. So Italy is somewhere to watch. So there are things happening in other parts of the world. Yeah. Lisa.
I'm changing the topic a little.
Yeah.
So I'm like pretty radical. My like big problem with Andrew Yang's plan is the citizen thing and just the fact that it's a government program, like in general. Because I feel like, if we're gonna create a basic income system in this world, which I think is very necessary that we do it, I don't think it should be limited to any particular country, and I don't think it can be like a successful program. It should be available to everyone, and that's even besides for the problem of like all the undocumented people who live in this country and should get the basic income just like citizens.
You're saying that every country should institute a basic income, but you
I
said
mean,
something
yeah,
about the government.
but then, well, okay, so
Who's
then
going to pay? Who's going to pay it? Not the government.
right. So I mean, my feeling is that every person sort of should inherit some amount of like the resources that Earth has.
Like from who?
From
Gives
whom?
it, yeah.
That's it.
Well, that's just it. We're assuming that like where does the money come from that the government is giving to us?
It comes.
Where did the
The
U.S.
government collects it from everybody.
Where did it come from, like originally?
It's our production. How we produce the wealth.
Who gave it value? Like where did
The market gives it value. There's nobody gives it value. The market gives it value.
What you got for us, Jonathan?
Is there any technological solution that you can think of that might allow
well, this
for
isn't
this?
like a room for pitching.
You can call the distributor whatever you want, but there's going to be a distributor, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Fine. There could be no government,
Okay.
but somebody's still going to do it.
There's a certain amount of stuff in the United States. You don't have to value it the way the market values it. You're perfectly free to say, I don't think that yacht you have is worth $20 million, even though the market says it's worth $20 million. You're free to ignore it, pay more for it, pay less for it. I'll tell you, if you try to pay less for it, you won't get it. Nobody will give it you. But you can value it any way you want, just that the market says it's $20 million. And that's just life. I mean, that's like part of the universe. There's a price on everything in the United States. There's a bid and an offer for everything. That's called a market economy.
Well, yeah, I think most people know what a market economy is. Yeah.
No, but she's sort of raising the general question, well, what gives it value? What gives something value? Why is something worth X? Why is the yacht worth $20 million? There's no particular God-given reason. It's a market price.
It's not the yacht I'm talking about. It's the money. It's the,
Well, the money
it's
is-
U.S. dollars, or
Money is a
maybe
piece of paper,
maybe
which represents a share of that object.
so.
$1 represents 1/20 millionth of a $20 million yacht.
So I'm going to quickly go to the live stream. Ron says someone has to manage the distribution of resources. That someone is most likely the government. If not the government, then who?
Yeah.
And Madeline says exactly my thinking.
Yeah.
So now we're going to go to Stas.
Makes sense.
Oh, I was gonna make a comment on citizenship thing. Don't forget that this is a presidential campaign, and he's suggesting to implement it starting 2021, and he's thinking small, like it's only $1,000 and it starts with citizens. I agree that probably, I don't know, green card holders, are they supposed to get? Probably, but for 2021, as he's aiming to, I think it's a good start.
Yeah,
So I guess I'm gonna do the common injection again. So Americans pay for it. Why do non-Americans get it?
Well, America, the country, stole a lot of shit from other countries.
Okay, that's.
So.
I never believe in reciprocal. Like,
Yeah.
Well,
May I comment?
Go ahead.
I became U.S. citizen last year. I've been
Congratulations.
living in the United States for 8 years. I had a green card. I've been working and paying my taxes for 7 years. That's the point. Even though I agree that for his position, they should be just United States citizens, it's not that Americans pay for it. It's people who work here.
Okay, so I think another answer to that question is that it's also better for the economy and better for everyone if everyone gets it, if everyone here gets it, because then you don't have people who are poor who aren't being who aren't able to participate in the system.
Then okay, maybe I'm just misunderstanding you. What if like someone just comes to the U.S. and gets it on these or doesn't do anything?
Yeah, I mean, my position would be that the U.S. should pay for basic income for everyone in the world, but
the U.S.
Or whichever, or whichever country is doing the basic income. But I'll go to Mark.
So I think a little bit to your point, I wouldn't be dismissive of what I think you're asking, at least a little bit philosophically. It's okay to ask that because I know someone from a former communist country that I won't mention, and this person is quite wealthy today, and I won't mention how this person acquired that wealth. But this person talks to me, and whenever I sort of needle about how wealthy this person is, this person will use descriptions about, well, these are just some of the finer things that I have, and I'm a kind of person who can appreciate the finer things, but then will refer to what I would say are the masses of this person's country as little people. And little people are people who don't really appreciate the finer things the way this person does, and that makes it okay. And I think what I'm trying to illustrate there a little bit is, yes, there is this notion of who benefits and is somebody else paying for somebody else to benefit, but a little bit, I would say, try to leave open a little bit of room for this sort of philosophical idea of, whose oil is it in the ground? Is it because it's under and there's a geographical boundary and there's oil and this is a little bit the idea of there are, for example, natural resources and different jurisdictions, different geopolitical areas, just they have to decide, or they do decide, who's that resource belong to. And again, at least notionally, and I'm not off the deep end on the whole fourth industrial revolution stuff, but a bit notionally is you do get to a point where your productive capacity looks a lot like a natural resource, and if you know what's considered the natural resource curse, as it pertains to countries, then you need to be sensitive to that. If your production, all your production, including intellectual production, not necessarily creativity, but a lot of intellectual production, begins to look a lot more like oil in the ground, diamonds in the ground, minerals, rare earth mineral, whatever. You've got to at least be thinking about, where does the value of that sort of go?
Yeah, I really like that analogy. Go ahead, Charlie.
I think the issue of whether you should give money to people who are not U.S. citizens or who are Martians who happen to be is sort of irrelevant to the discussion. It's a minor issue. If you can get a basic income out there to start with, that's the major problem. There's going to be a lot of resistance to the basic income. Never mind the fine details of whether you give it to people who are in jail or aren't in jail or aren't American or whatever. I mean, you guys are talking as though this is like everybody agrees on this already, and we're just going to worry about this little last detail of whether if you're exactly a thief or not, should you get money?
Well, I think it's fair for the people in this room to be bringing up the things they are nitpicking.
It's nice to hear that, but frankly, if you go to a Texas oilman and say, that oil really doesn't belong to you, you know what he's going to say to you?
Well, if there were a Texas oilman in here and he was participating in the discussion, then maybe we'd be having a different discussion. Go ahead, Lisa.
So I agree that it would be amazing, and I would shut up if Andrew got elected and we all get a basic income. That would be pretty cool. I don't care how they fund it. I don't care the details. That would be great. But as long as we're having this theoretical discussion, I just want you to be open to the possibility that if we end up with a less than perfect system that provides a basic income. We might end up being stuck with that being the best we can get. Now, that system, having an imperfect system in place successfully, would prevent us possibly from having a perfect system. And so, since we're having this unrealistic discussion group anyway, like why not try to figure out the perfect system that, like why not aim high? We have literally nothing to lose.
It's certainly possible. It's possible that we'll end up stuck with an imperfect system. But that's kind of not the way things have gone in history. If you remember, Social Security was put through because of the Depression.
I don't remember.
The conservative, no, Social Security, the idea that everybody should have some kind of guarantee in retirement, that was very, very radical. The conservatives, the Republicans were very much against that because it's the same idea. You're giving money to people that somehow may not have earned it, and they don't like that. Conservatives don't like that. So they got it through because there was a depression and everybody was desperate. Look what followed. And that wasn't a perfect system, certainly. Social Security is not a great system, but it's something. We have Medicaid. You probably wouldn't have had Medicaid if you didn't have Social Security first.
Well, you know what? These programs maybe prevented us from having the basic income system.
Sure, but I'm saying for our country, it's very hard to decide ideally what the perfect system is going to be, what the best thing you're going to get through. I defy you to find a lot of people who are going to agree with you just for the basics of basic income. Never mind all the little details like every convict should get it or shouldn't get it.
Well, I bet they would agree with me if I could give them a basic income.
Maybe. Maybe. Don't forget there are a lot of people in this country who are wealthy who say, I don't want a basic income. I don't want you to give it to the poor people either.
Yeah.
I don't need the basic income and I don't want to give it away to the poor people.
There are a lot more poor people though.
Yeah, but they don't seem to vote. That's why we have Trump.
So I agree with Charlie and I agree with Eliza. I think Charlie is right that in the real world, we don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And if we can get something really good in place and people can actually see that it's working and that it's helping, that's a stepping stone towards something further. And I think, maybe Social Security, we got stuck and it prevented us from having a basic income, but maybe we wouldn't even be talking about a basic income if we didn't already have things like Social Security to begin with. That being said, I also agree with Eliza that it's perfectly fine to be debating the finer points of basic income and how it should work and how it would work. Yeah, so that's it. Richard.
There's an argument that, I believe it's Idaho, they actually pay for homeless people to be in housing and for their food and things like that because it's cheaper to put them in a house than to keep having to pay for their emergency room bills 12 times a year or whatever.
Dampen your lovely thoughts. Just trying to be practical.
Can't dampen this.
Okay, so here's something from the Andrew Yang page, the section about inflation. He says, our plan for a universal basic income, so this is to address concerns about giving a bunch of people money causing inflation. He says, our plan for a universal basic income uses money already in the economy. In monetary economics, leading theory states that inflation is based on changes in the supply of money. Our UBI plan has no changes in the supply of money because it is funded by the value-added tax. Now, I think this is a really silly argument. I think if you're taking money from people who weren't spending it directly into the productive economy, and then you are giving it to people who will be actually buying things, then that actually uses up more resources. I don't know that the fact that you took it away from some rich people is going to make a difference. This is related to a debate that Charlie and I have been having online.
Yeah, I don't fully understand your reasoning. I have to tell you that.
Yeah.
I don't understand. To me, there's a certain amount of wealth in the country, and if you're going to give money to certain poor people and not asking them to do anything for it, you got to take it from somewhere. And I say take it from wealthy people. I don't see where else it's going to come from. To me, you can't create money out of nothing. you seem to think you can, and I still don't quite understand what you made this remark that's confusing, that wealth, a dollar can have two different values. I don't quite understand what you're driving at. I know you must have something in mind, but I don't understand what it is.
Just that a dollar in a rich person's pocket is going to go, like in expectation, is going to go towards the purchase of fewer resources than a dollar in a poor person's pocket.
Yeah, but the dollar is still worth the same thing to both people. It's just that the wealthy person may not use it.
Right, the dollar can be spent on the same thing for the same, whatever. But in expectation, if we look at the dollars that rich people have, we can basically treat them as not really in the system as much.
Right, that's the point of redistributing the wealth. It boosts up the lower part.
Go ahead, Richard.
It's like the circulation, how money circulates, like I heard, or how it's how the benefit later on. Like I heard that what is it? Starter, that was it. First starter, whatever the program is for
Head Start.
That's it. Is worth like $6 for every $1 spent now, or something like that. And if you you can spend when you put in a poor wealthy person's pocket, it's only worth 90 cents on a dollar or something like that, because they don't circulate it. But if you put it in if you give it to a poor person, it circulates a lot more. It's worth like $4 or something.
Yeah, this is what Keynes called the marginal propensity to consume. So poor people with their money, they're going to buy more stuff than rich people are going to buy with their money.
Relative to their wealth, not
per dollar.
Relative to their wealth. A dollar to a wealthy person, as a proportion of his wealth, is going to spend less of it than a poor person will spend a proportion of his wealth.
It's not just that he's going to spend less of it. It's that what he spends it on is going to use up fewer resources. So a luxury car, for example, will take up roughly the same amount of resources to put together. It has the same amount of metal and whatever as a normal car. But the rich person is paying 4 times as much. Right.
I don't understand. I'm not sure what the point is.
So the rich person spent 4 times as much money to buy the same amount of stuff.
So what? I don't understand.
Wait, I lost it also.
The point. Yeah.
The point is that each dollar that the rich person spent per dollar went towards buying less stuff.
So is that good?
It's neither good nor bad, but what it means is that if you take that money from the rich person and give it to 4 poor people, they're going to buy 4 cars instead of 1 car. So now the question is, does the economy have the capacity to produce 3 additional cars? So I don't know that the fact that you took the money from somewhere, like a rich person, really addresses the inflation problem. Does that make sense?
I don't think it can solve the inflation problem. I mean, that's what I'm saying. That you're going to get into a huge problem trying to figure out whether, in fact, inflation is generated by X, Y, Z.
Right.
You need a model for the economy, and nobody has a model for the economy. So the best way is to forget about the question and just talk about general principles.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, because you can't solve that problem.
Go ahead, Elisa.
Alex is making a gamble that says that if you distribute wealth or invent new money and distribute it,
2 different things.
okay. If you invent money instead of causing inflation, it will, like, take the food thing. Okay, the world, let's assume, has the capacity to feed everyone, but for some reason, it's not. So we're going to take a gamble that says, like, if we give everyone in the world $10 a day, the productivity of our food supply will go up. The world will create new value in the form of food. And that market didn't exist before because there was no demand, because there was no money. There's new, that has created, there are more dollar bills in the world because we, invented them. But there's also more food in the world, more real wealth. Right. So just because you're creating new money and, via basic income without a, carefully thought out taxation plan, it doesn't mean that there's going to be inflation necessarily. Could be, but
I absolutely agree that nothing you say will definitely imply inflation, because we don't have any model that tells us how inflation gets created.
Well, stop saying that.
They say things. No,
People have
say,
models for inflation.
people
Well,
say
there's a
things
bunch of
like-
different models.
People say things like inflation is a monetary phenomenon, just as you quoted there. Nobody knows.
Right.
Nobody knows
I disagree with that.
what
I would disagree that nobody
inflation,
knows. I think anyway,
But,
go
but
ahead.
you don't have to solve that problem. It's not necessary to solve a deep economic problem to figure out what's going on here. If you create money out of nothing, just think about it for a second. You know, there's a finite amount of stuff in our country.
Is there, you could say
Okay.
the capacity for, you know, for
So-
things that we can create and consume is infinite.
So
I would like a painting of a
okay,
cat.
so Alex is a wealthy person. And let's say you're a poor person. So you say, let's just create money and give it to me so I can go and buy some more stuff from Alex. Because Alex is a wealthy guy, he produces things. Sounds great. The only problem is Alex says, hold it. Wait a minute. I used to be 100 times wealthier than you, and all of a sudden I'm only 20 times wealthier than you because somehow some money was given to you and you now are wealthier. I object. Why should you get wealthier and you haven't done anything? I worked like a dog to create things and you do nothing, and all of a sudden you're catching up to me in wealth. What's your argument against that?
Inflation, which then adjusts your.
Well, inflation is one of these economic model problems. Forget about the model. Just talk
You
about.
can't forget about it if the price of the goods you're gonna buy rise
You don't know if
relative,
it's gonna
yes, they
rise.
will.
No,
And therefore,
you don't know.
she can't buy any more than she could before, and he can't buy
Maybe
any more
that'll
than he
happen,
could
maybe
before,
not.
and they're relatively in the same position. Maybe it's just.
I'm going to go to Daniel now.
I really, because I don't really understand the full question or argument yet. So after you, let's say you just, so let's keep going with your car thing. So if the poor person buys 4 cars, so that means there will be less natural resources, and that means money will be worthless, and there will be inflation. Is that what's happening? Okay.
Yeah. So essentially, I agree with Charlie that if you're in a position where you don't really know what the productive capacity of the economy is, and you have no idea if we're at maximum capacity or if there's excess capacity, like if you're in that position, which Charlie claims that everybody in the world is in this position.
No, I'm not claiming there's no excess capacity.
You're claiming that we don't know. Yeah.
I am claiming the economy is sufficiently complex that you have no idea.
So I'm claiming that if you're in Charlie's position and you don't know whether the economy has any excess productive capacity, then you don't know whether giving people additional money is going to cause inflation in the case where there is no excess productive capacity, or will induce additional production if there's latent productive capacity that's going unused. Because if we had the capacity to produce those additional cars, we'd just make more cars and there wouldn't be inflation. Right? Does that make sense, Daniel? But what I can say is that if you're giving people money, regardless of whether you tax the rich, it doesn't affect whether it would cause inflation. So this is my objection to what Andrew Yang is saying. He's saying, oh, this won't cause inflation because we're taking money from rich people. But the rich people weren't going to buy those cars anyway. So if you take money from the rich people, it doesn't change the fact that you're giving people more money to spend on more actual stuff. So that's my comment to Andrew Yang.
So do you have an alternative?
I mean, I happen to believe for good reasons that the economy does have excess capacity, that there's plenty of excess capacity, and that there's room to give people money. So I think it's going to be right. So I think it's going to be fine. I just don't think you need to tax anyone. You can just print money and hand it out. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so when you hear method and Charlie's method both a little bit similar, like yours is a direct tax on the wealthy. I would question your color argument because I would say that in a free market, in theory, isn't it supposed to be that money is still flowing through, like that price is increased, so it goes to say like the workers, and then the workers buy food or something like that.
So your argument is that if the rich person has the money, they're going to spend it, and it's going to circulate back into the productive part of the economy, kind of through the labor market and stuff like that. So I would say that is not the case, that the economy doesn't work that way, that money doesn't just kind of distribute itself evenly if you kind of let it flow. It actually kind of trickles up and collects in rich people's pockets. And the labor market, But we expect the labor market to provide sufficient incomes for people, but there's kind of no mechanism in the economy that makes people's incomes from labor line up perfectly with what's optimal for the economy in terms of like getting the most out of what the economy can produce for people. So ultimately, we care about people. Like that's what we all care about, and regardless of where we are in the political spectrum, we want everyone to be better off. We want humanity to be successful and prosperous, right? So the question is, how do you allow people to get the most out of what the economy has to offer? And the labor market it doesn't naturally do that. If you look at technology makes it more efficient to use any resource, including labor. So technology kind of speaks to the fourth industrial revolution point, or just technology in general, not just upcoming technology, but technology over the past hundreds and thousands of years. Every time you have technology, it allows us to produce the same amount of stuff using less labor, or it allows us to produce more using the same amount of labor. So if all you have is technological advancement, then you're not going to be producing more stuff, because where's the money going to come from to buy that stuff? So we've kind of invented mechanisms to get more money to people, and they've been there's various like labor regulation, that kind of stuff, but also monetary policy and just various ways of getting a flow of money going to people so they can buy the stuff that the economy becomes capable of producing. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I'm trying to think, especially complicated, that it's hard to be clear about this stuff. But maybe I can give you a clarifying example.
Yeah.
Suppose it's out of the United States. Think of a fairly simple society.
Sure.
Which everybody was more or less equal, and all they did all day long was to raise their food.
Sure.
And consume it.
Yes.
They worked in the farm and raised the food.
Yes.
Okay.
Subsistence economy.
Sorry?
Subsistence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whatever. Just, okay.
Yeah.
So they find out one day that another country is going to attack them, and they say, "Oh, we got to make some arrows."
Sure.
We use Elise's plan. The government magically prints money, creates money, says, "We'll go buy those arrows from this other country that's friendly to us, China."
Mm-hmm.
Take that magic money. You assume China accepts it because they don't realize that it was just created out of nothing. They just say it's a dollar, and dollars are dollars. So they take it. They manufacture the arrows. They give the arrows to the people. Right? Okay. Now the Chinese have this money. And they say, we got this money. Let's go buy some stuff in this country that just bought the arrows from us.
Mm-hmm.
They go and they buy the country. Because if those dollars are worth anything, just created them out of nothing, they just buy the whole country. Either the dollars are worth something or they're not worth something. You can't create them out of nothing. They don't have any value if they're created out of nothing. Now, it's true. You can trick people because you just create a dollar and they see the dollar and they say, it's a dollar, it's worth 1/20 millionth of a $20 million yacht. But if it really was created out of nothing, you have this kind of situation where people say, hey, wait a second. Suddenly I'm a lot wealthier and now I can go buy things that you said before you couldn't buy. You just can't do that. I mean,
so you're describing a scenario in which resources are clearly constrained. Like people are producing exactly enough food to eat. So there's really no kind of slack in there. There's no excess capacity in their economy, right?
Well, they could produce the arrows themselves.
But they'd starve.
Perhaps. I mean, like I said, it depends on, the economy is complex. I don't know whether they could or couldn't do it without starving. But I'm just giving a hypothetical situation where they say, why should we bother producing it? We'll just magically create money and we'll go buy it from China.
Yeah, that's not going to work.
But that's what I'm saying. You can't just create money and say, I'm just
you can't just create money. I mean, there's a constraint on how much money can flow in the economy, and that constraint is the productive capacity.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
Money represents the token representation of our productive capacity. I agree. And you can't just create productive capacity out of nothing.
No.
You have to produce.
Right. If the productive capacity is there, then the economy has room for more spending.
Right. That's the idea of lending, by the way. That's what banks do.
Yeah, exactly.
They create money out of nothing by lending.
I think I know how to make this clear.
Go ahead, Daniel.
So basically, they're saying that you can print money. Money is not gonna suddenly increase production, but because people have money, there's going to be more demand for production.
Right.
And then so producers will have incentives to produce more. And that's how you get more.
Yes, that's
So-
the banking lending system.
Yeah.
That's what the bank system is.
So
But they don't
there-
create it out of nothing.
Yeah. So if your production is at capacity, then this won't work.
Right.
They're saying it
Right.
is not.
I thought Charlie, when you had your example of this primitive society, I thought you were going to go in another direction with it. I thought you were gonna say that, okay, everybody's kind of producing their own food and they're living off the food they produce, and then someone invents a technology such that, okay, now only half of the people need to work to produce the food for everyone. Then what happens?
That person gets very wealthy, and half the people don't lose. They don't have to grow food anymore.
Well, half the people.
You're leaving that out. The person who has the technology becomes very wealthy because he sells it to the people.
Well, let's say the
just
technology
gonna
is
say magic
let's say the
technology.
technology is discovered by the society and widely disseminated, and there's not like some inventor who's getting rich off it.
Well, that's different.
It is different, and that's why I specified, because I wanted to talk about something different. Yeah. So now they just have access to this technology. That means that only half the people need to work to feed everyone. The problem is that now the people who aren't working anymore, where do they get the money to buy the stuff that the economy is now capable of producing? Right? They're not working. They could start, making arrows or making other things that that other people in the economy want, and then selling it back to like the people who produce food and stuff. But now you've got a problem because now you've got more goods and you haven't increased the flow of money. So now you've got deflation in your economy.
Well, you can increase the flow of money if you have more goods. Money just represents the goods. It's just a means of transferring of goods.
Yeah.
It's just a piece of paper that represents
Money's
some kind of value.
Yeah, money's a piece of paper that represents some kind of value. And if people, so the people lose their jobs, right? Because they can no longer make their food. I don't know.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's not that complicated. You've got a certain amount of spending in the economy, and people get their money through this labor to buy, let's say everybody buys food from their next door neighbor. Now you've got half the people, everyone can produce twice as much food. So they produce food for themselves and then one of their neighbors. But where does that neighbor get the money to buy the food?
But the government in this primitive country could say, they didn't have to make us magic money. They could have said to everyone, okay, guys, you guys consume all the food you raise every year, so we don't have any money to buy arrows from China. You're going to have to get by with 10% less food. And we're going to take 10% of the productive capacity and we'll use it to buy those arrows. We'll make the arrows or whatever. It's equivalent. Either China makes it or you make it. That's what, in effect, you would do in my proposal for this basic income. You just say, okay, we're taking part of what everybody has and we're giving it to the people who don't have. That's perfectly sensible. I mean, or you can produce. Everybody can produce more food, but assuming you can't produce more food, you'd have to do the other thing.
Like everybody could produce. Let's say everybody could produce twice as much stuff now, and some of it's food and some of it's not.
So then they can pay for the hours.
Yeah, everybody. Well, we're not talking about China anymore, right? China's not in this scenario.
I'm just saying there's demand for hours. Suddenly there's demand for
let's
hours.
go.
There's a sudden demand for hours that wasn't there before.
Right.
How do you deal with that?
Well, there's no demand if people don't have money to buy the arrows, right?
No, they want the arrows. They don't have the money, but they want the arrows because they're going to be attacked.
They want the arrows, but they don't have the money.
Right. So there's demand for the arrows, but they haven't got the money to buy it.
Well, demand is a function of how much money you have.
Not necessarily.
Go ahead, Richard.
Well, before well, about 1,000 years ago during the Dark Ages, and I believe it was France, they actually had they deposited all their grain and things into granaries, and then they were given these a stick, and then the stick was etched into it, and then it was split in half, and then they used the stick to pay for goods, the amount of goods. Well, since the food in the granary this spoiled over time, the stick was worth less, so they had to spend it before a certain time elapsed.
Sure.
And so that was before the king started printing coins and things like that. But during that system, the people actually were taller and had much better health than underneath the coin system because they didn't have there wasn't a deflationary economy.
So how does this relate to what we were talking about?
Would the stick get worse over time?
No, that's
Match
the rich.
Right.
This is when it's a mechanism to get people to spend their money. I have no idea how to say that.
It's
word.
demurrage. Yeah.
Used it
Yeah,
in conversation.
Yeah. It's when you have currency that kind of devalues on its own over time. So like in Wurgel, Austria, during when was it, 1930s?
It's Weimar Germany.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So 1930s, they were having monetary problems, and they invented their
Not because they had to pay reparations for on their how much to the winning countries in World War I.
Yeah. Okay. So this is anyway. This is kind of off topic now. But yeah.
I really like this idea.
That's why I like that.
Anyway, they have this money where in order to spend it, you had to buy a stamp and put a stamp on it every month. So the idea is that if you held the money, you'd have to pay in order to hold it. Yeah. So yeah, that's something that happened. Okay. So I don't know. I think we don't really need to talk about the inflation issue anymore unless anyone has any kind of burning.
Well, I have a question.
Yeah,
Because you brought up that quantitative easing. You said that it
Right.
did not affect inflation. Maybe Charlie would know, but quantitative easing started in 2008, and they're not doing it. I think they stopped in 2015.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure. I'm assuming that statement is correct, right? It did not affect because quantitative easing is basically buying stock market.
That's an illustration of what I'm
Printing money.
trying to point out, is that it's very difficult to figure out. Before 2008, if you had said the Fed is going to do quantitative easing, you would have said that's going to lead to inflation.
Yeah.
But it didn't.
Yeah.
Like I said, people don't know how to forecast whether inflation is going to come or not going to come. It's very complicated. And I'm not saying that because I know. I'm saying nobody knows. Even the Fed doesn't know.
Just because you don't know and just because the Fed doesn't know doesn't mean nobody knows, Charlie. And the Fed does know some things. Like they might not know exactly how much inflation is going to happen when, but they know which levers to pull to nudge it in various directions. Like they actually have an algorithm that they follow.
I know they follow an algorithm, but it doesn't work.
What do you mean it doesn't work? The value of the dollar has been pretty stable.
1979, interest rates were rising and rising and rising.
Well, that was Paul Volcker, and he did that
Paul Volcker
intentionally.
said, they had a meeting.
Yeah.
Paul Volcker said, that's it. We're not going to try to peg interest rates anymore. We're going to just do the money supply. We'll let interest rates do whatever they want to do.
Right.
Okay?
Yes.
The minutes of that meeting, two of the members of the Federal Reserve Board who were in that decision predicted that rates would go down after they made that decision.
Yeah.
Rates went through the roof.
No, you're right that
They do not know what's going to happen.
You're right that at that time they were playing with an algorithm that wasn't able to they weren't able to predict what was going to happen or even which direction things were going to go. You're right about that.
I'll give you other examples.
There have been examples throughout history. I'm saying in recent times, like within the last 20 years, it's been.
If you read the notes carefully, you realize that what they do is react to the economy.
I do read the notes, and they do react to the economy, but they also
don't move the economy; they react to it.
Well, they
People
nudge it.
think they're forecasting, but they're not.
I don't.
Did you say that happened?
That was 1979.
1979.
Okay, so do you think that there haven't been any improvements in models?
They have the same issues all the time. I'll give you many, many examples of that. They would like X to happen, so they do something and it doesn't happen. And they say, we don't know why it's not happening. They mostly react to the economy. The economy gets stronger, they raise interest rates. The economy gets weaker, they lower interest rates.
Yeah.
But that's a reaction to the economy. It's not a forecast.
But it works pretty well. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the dollar has been very stable over the last 20, 30 years.
Depends on what you mean by stable. The dollar's been going down. I don't know. What do you mean
Well,
by
they
stable?
target an interest rate of 2%. A lot of times they have trouble getting it there. Or sorry, an inflation rate of 2%. A lot of times they have trouble getting it there. But it's been a low, steady rate of inflation, which is exactly what they want, and it's fine.
I don't believe the Fed has any control over interest rates.
Over inflation rates, you mean?
Over interest rates or inflation.
Well, they set the Fed funds target, and that.
Fed funds, yes, but that's
Okay.
minor. That's a minor thing.
All right.
The market for rates is much bigger than that. They have
Yeah,
no
of
Fed
course.
funds.
Go ahead.
I don't know. They just raised the interest rate, right? Interest rates today.
Yeah.
They did, yes.
Fed rates. It's the Fed rates, which is just the rates that you lend to banks, interbanks.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk more about Andrew Yang.
Yeah. Is he on the ballot in every state?
There's no election happening right now. I mean, I think he's going to try to be. Well, he's going to be running as a Democrat in the Democratic primaries. He wants to be the Democratic candidate.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, then he hasn't had a chance.
He basically doesn't have a chance. That's correct. Yeah.
Except in Maine, maybe.
Except in Maine because they have ranked choice voting now. Yeah. Yeah. We are getting toward the end. I want to hear. I don't know. Does anyone else have any thoughts about Andrew Yang? All right.
Well, what's his argument? Does he give an argument why this should be? Is it because of this?
It's what Martin said.
That there's going to be such unemployment that you have to have this to
Yeah.
protect people?
Yeah, and I think that argument is kind of right and kind of not because I think we can.
The question is whether it appeals to voters. It might appeal to voters. As I say, I don't know if there's any proof that that's really accurate, but it might appeal to voters.
It might. Yeah. Richard.
He's going to give out a basic income in France, and not France, Iowa and New Hampshire. It's like I said at the top of his page is like the New Hampshire Freedom Dividend or something like that.
Yeah. He's picking one citizen in New Hampshire to give $1,000 a month to for the entire year of 2019 as kind of like a promotional gimmick. Yeah. It's not a basic income, but
how's that going to be a promotion for basic income?
oh, because he's tying it to his basic income plan, and he's going to hold this person up and say, hey, look at how well this person did receiving $1,000 a month.
That person better be an upstanding citizen.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know how he's figuring it out. I think it's like a random.
Hispanic or black, all the other things that people who vote for Trump say is unfair.
Yeah, you better be white.
You better be white.
It's a political thing, and one of the things he talks about in his materials is, and this really rubs me the wrong way. He says, "What would you do with an additional $1,000 a month?" Like he's like, when people think about basic income, he's asking them to imagine what they would do with an extra $1,000 a month.
It's not that important for us. It's important for poor people.
It's not. I mean, but even
people.
most people would be happy with $1,000 a month, but that's not the issue. The issue is, whether the plan is actually feasible for the economy and for society, right? Like,
Of course, it's feasible.
it's not. Of course, it's feasible. Most people think basic income is a ridiculous idea. And
No, they think it's a ridiculous idea because they don't want to give money to people who don't deserve it. It's not that it's not feasible.
I think there's less of that, and I think there. Yeah, go ahead, Martin.
Again, to emphasize, we're making these value judgments, which is perfectly okay.
Yeah.
But
About what people think.
one is saying basic income, and some people think it's lunacy, and another one is saying, oh no, it's not lunacy. It's perfect, pure logic and morally fit. And my point is, we're not even talking about money, economics, or any of this. We have opinions, which is good. I'm not arguing against it, but let's recognize that there's an emotional dimension to this discussion, an emotional and a sort of a values judgment
I'm
to
just saying
the
that
discussion.
it's perfectly feasible to fund it. It's not that hard to fund it.
I know you believe that, and I believe that also, but for different
That's
reasons.
not a value judgment. It's just here's a mechanism of funding it, period.
Right, but I think most people in the world do not necessarily aren't convinced that it's economically feasible. I think that is true. And I don't think it's just that they feel that other people don't deserve the money. I think there is that, but I think the reason they feel that other people don't deserve the money is because they feel like it's going to be, a drain on the system to give people money who aren't contributing or something like that. It's like the morality comes from somewhere, right? The moral judgments come from somewhere. Like if they believed that you could just give everyone money and everyone would be better off, then they would have no objection to it. But they feel like they're making a sacrifice or something.
That's why I make the argument that it makes the economy run better to have people with no wealth get some wealth.
Yeah.
That's as neutral argument as I can give. I can.
Well,
if
I
I go
agree
to
with
somebody, I say it's really the morally right thing to do to give poor people money. They'll say, I don't think it's the morally right thing to do. Some people, say, no, why should you give money to poor people?
I mean, if you can convince them that it's doable and that it's actually going to help them, it's going to make their lives better, and help the economy and help them specifically within the context of the economy, then
a wealthy person is not going to look at $12,000 a year as helping them.
living in a world where nobody's poor or less crime, all of that stuff is great. That's good for the rich person too, right?
That's possibly the argument. That's what I'm saying. You got to do something that says why they would be benefited by the thing. 12,000 is not the reason. Yeah, if you can show the economy is going to produce more, that they're going to get wealthier, everybody's going to get wealthier. That's good.
Right. You have to show that it's feasible. You have to show that it works. Go ahead, Elisa.
So how do you guys feel about seeing basic income as a political issue? How does that make you feel?
So let's end with that question. I kind of want to go around the room and have everybody answer that question in turn. Let's start with Charlie.
How does it make me feel?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I mean, I'm all for it. I'm as radical as you get. But I don't spend my energy talking to other radicals who are going to agree with me. If you want to get something done, you got to be able to talk to the other side. There are many, many people who don't think this is a good idea for various reasons, and you have to deal with that.
And also share whether you would vote for Andrew Yang in the primary. If you were hypothetically.
My voting technique is very, very simple.
Yeah.
In the United States, there are two parties.
Sure.
And you have to be an idiot if you can't tell the difference between those two parties.
I'm saying in the primary, when he's running against other Democrats, would you vote for him?
Again, it's the same kind of thing.
Okay.
If the candidate that I think needs to win, or if there's some doubt about their winning, I'm going to give them the vote, even if I may prefer Andrew Yang's ideas, because I don't think he's going to win.
Right.
I'm very much pragmatist about voting. I think a lot of people in the last election did a lot of nutty stuff because they said Hillary Clinton's obviously going to win, so I can vote for some stupid third-party candidate, and that's
So I'm going to amend the question and say, if the Democratic primaries, if you're a Democrat and the Democratic primaries were a ranked choice voting scheme where voting for the wrong person isn't going to hurt anything, would you vote for Andrew Yang?
I'd vote for the most radical person on the thing. I did that when, for example, when Johnson was running in Massachusetts.
Okay.
I voted for some wacky third-party thing because I knew that Johnson was going to carry Massachusetts.
Okay. Cool.
Fine. I'll certainly do that, but I'm not going to risk a serious kind of accident. Given the way the American system works, it's not a system where you can get your own.
Yeah, I was more trying to just get at whether you kind of believe in his idea or his goal.
Well, it's just the very idea that he's proposing it, I think, is what's wonderful.
Great. All right, Sultan, how do you feel about basic income being in politics now, and would you vote for Andrew Yang if it didn't hurt someone else's chances of winning?
I don't have the rights for voting.
You can't vote.
If you were able to vote in America,
I'll vote for you. You can pay me and
being
I'll vote your
a
choice.
political issue, I think it's inevitable.
But it comes up as a political point.
Sorry?
Inevitable, what about it is inevitable? That it's gonna come up as a political
It's
agenda?
unavoidable being political issue. So it's okay for me. I would want to follow him, but as I told before, he should make it more detailed.
Make it more detailed.
It's very superficial.
Okay. Stops.
I like the fact that probably it's going to be discussed more on a TV, in a debate. So they bringing this topic up, and even though he doesn't have chances, maybe in 4 years there's going to be 3 candidates that are running. So even though he's using it probably for his interests, I'm for it.
Like,
I think it sounds futuristic. I would not vote.
Because of the basic income thing.
It's futuristic. Why is futuristic a bad reason to vote for something?
No, I think the basic income in politics sounds futuristic, which is cool, but I don't like MBAs specifically.
Oh,
Yeah, I think it's a useful interjection into the political discourse. I have a couple of problems with some of his hypotheses that have to do with the robot takeover of sort of intra-economy, social strata. I also take issue with, I think it could be wrong, but he strikes me as buying into the whole notion that economic unease was what motivated Trump voters as opposed to outright racism. So I take issue with that. His fundamental understanding where things are at.
Daniel.
I think if basic income is my only topic of consideration, then I would vote for it. But I think there are other issues, so I want to hear what he thinks of those things.
Yeah.
It depends on what the other candidates have to say. I like what they're saying on different topics. I'm not an issue-based voter. I'm just who has the best chance to win, who has the lesser of two evils, sort of thing.
Okay. So similar to Daniel. Or you want to look at the other issues as well. Yeah. Martin.
So I think of myself as reasonably well educated, having gone to a pretty good school and such, but I'm one of Charlie's flaming idiots who didn't vote for the candidate of either major parties. For the first time, I'm almost 60 years old, and for the first time in my adult voting life, I did not vote for a candidate from either of the two major parties, simply because I found them both fundamentally dishonest and absolute. Well, the fundamental dishonesty of both candidates was enough for me to say enough is enough, and I'm going to vote for a third-party candidate for the first time in my life. But to the point of saying, so would I vote, for Yang? I think he's ahead of the curve, but I think he's on a curve that's happening, but he may be a little bit ahead of the curve, and so I'm glad there's somebody out there sort of making these kinds of proposals because they're worth thinking about.
Yep. Jonathan.
So I feel that it's natural that these discussions happen in politics. Doesn't mean it needs to be exclusively happening in politics. And that's okay with me. And I'd vote for him, just because it's cool. Yeah, I can tell my friends about it if I voted for him.
Yeah, Eliza.
Yeah, I would probably vote for him, assuming that there's nothing horribly wrong about his other political positions, according to me. But on another note, I really feel that we're in a new era, where I don't think that a basic income has to come from the government, and I would prefer if it didn't come from the government, from governmental source. And ideally, I would prefer if it was coming from a completely decentralized source.
Such as
Bitcoin.
Okay.
Which I could.
All right. So Madeline and Ron also answered. Well, first Madeline just said if Charlie lived in Holland, he would have to decide between 28 political parties, not just some stupid third-party candidate.
Right. That's what happens when you live in a democracy. You have to decide between lots of parties, not the United States.
And Ron said, I would encourage discussion about UBI, but I'm not sure I would vote for Yang. So I think, for me personally, I love that basic income is being discussed on this stage. I'm kind of with Daniel and Richard and Ron. I'm not sure I like Andrew Yang's basic income proposal, although I do like that he is talking about it and bringing it up. And I would like to see, what his other things are, because if he's a really great candidate in every other respect, maybe some basic income is better than another candidate who has no basic income. So I wait and see. And Ron says that Yang is a message candidate.
Right.
So I think that's accurate.
Candidate.
All right. So that's it. I'm going to end the live stream, and then you guys can tell me what you really think. Bye, everybody.